Yesterday we started to talk about the idea of why. Why is it that if Chassidus is so amazing, why did nobody do it in the past? You know, what was the issue? So by way of introduction, I think it's interesting to note in the parasha this week something very interesting about the nature of the Torah. Because yes, it's true, and it's a valid question to ask. How come it is that if Chassidus or Pnimis HaTorah, the esoteric part of Judaism, is so central, how come it is that it wasn't learnt in the same way as it is now in previous generations? Good question. But you know how it is in Judaism. You answer a question with a question. So here's a question. When Hashem came onto Mount Sinai at the time of the giving of the Torah, as we will read in this week's parasha, did he teach the people Gemara? It's an interesting question, right? Interesting perspective. Or for that matter, did he teach them Midrash or Musar, which is about character development? It's quite an interesting thought. So if we contextualize the original experience of the giving of the Torah, it does help us to answer this question. What is the story with esoteric Judaism? So what happened at the time of the giving of the Torah? Two things. First thing that happened is it says, Vayered Hashem al Har Sinai. Hashem came down onto the mountain. So it was not a broadcast out of heaven. It was a revelation. It was an incredible revelation. It was such a powerful revelation that the people were so overwhelmed by that revelation that the Gemara tells us they actually couldn't keep themselves in this world. And their souls flew out of their bodies, and their bodies were flung back a distance, the length of the Jewish camp, which is like 12 kilometers. And then angels had to come and they had to put them back together again. That's how dramatic the experience was. Because it was an experience of divine revelation, not of simple information. It's quite important to know that. That's the first thing. Now that plays out in the words that Hashem says. What does Hashem say? He says, Anoichi Hashem Elokecha. I am Hashem your God. Now, when you say I, you're not talking about a specific element of yourself, a specific attribute, a specific characteristic. When you say I, you're talking about everything that you're about. Now, when Hashem speaks, it's not speaking like we speak, where you just convey information. Because ultimately what speaking is there's something happening on the inside that you're now sharing on the outside. So in other words, speaking is revealing. That means that at the moment of the giving of the Torah, Hashem revealed Anoichi, I, the essence of who he was. Even if it was just temporary for that short period of time. But the fact is, he revealed it to us, which brings us to the second point. The second point is that when the Jewish people stood at the foot of Mount Sinai, the Torah says that all of the people saw the sounds. That means the sounds of Hashem speaking. They saw the sound. And based on that, the Gemara makes the comment that at that moment, the world was turned upside down, or at least their experience of the world was turned upside down. Royim es nishma. They saw what normally you can only hear. V'shoymin es hanira. And they heard what normally you can see. So you've got to ask yourself a question, what does that mean? What exactly was going on over there when it says that you could see what's normally heard and you heard what's normally seen? What does that mean? The big difference between things that you see and things that you hear is that you don't believe everything that you hear. And in fact, if you're a smart person, you don't believe most of what you hear. Because even if people are giving you accurate information, the truth of the matter is that when they convey that information, they might just, by accident, leave out a detail. And because of that, you could get the wrong story. It's the principle of broken telephone. So you hear something, and then the next person shares it, and the next person shares it, and as they say in Yiddish, it grows a beard. You know, it's not exactly the way that it was when it was originally told. So if you hear something, you may believe it, you may not believe it, because to you it feels a little bit far, a little bit distant, a little bit abstract. So for example, if somebody were to tell you, you know, I was driving yesterday, and you can't believe what I saw. I saw that every driver on the road was keeping to the speed limit. Nobody went through any red lights. Everybody was courteous to each other on the road. They were letting people in. If you heard that, you would say, I think, my friend, you broke the alcohol ban before it was lifted. I think something's a little bit wrong with you. I hear what you're saying, but I don't believe it, because hearing is not necessarily always absolutely compelling. But if it was you on the road and you saw this happening in front of you, as unbelievable as it might seem, you can't deny it because you're seeing it. So the distinction between what you see and what you hear is that what you see is real to you, whereas what you hear is questionable. So how do we live our lives today? Royin es anire. There are certain things that we see. We see the physical world. We look out of the window and we see it's either blue sky or gray clouds. That's real to us because we see it. I don't have to meditate on it. I don't have to read it in a book. I see it. And I see that there's a certain amount of money in my bank account. And I see that there are certain consequences for certain behaviors. These are the things that I see. They're real to me. The physical world is real to me. Now, spiritual stuff, I've heard about it. I went to a shiur. It was a very interesting shiur. And the guy spoke really well. And he conveyed the concepts in a brilliant way. So I've heard these ideas. And so, for example, I've heard that if you behave in a particular way, it's good for your soul. And I've heard that if you behave in a different way, it's bad for your soul. I've heard it. But it's secondhand smoke. It's stuff that I've heard. It's not stuff that I've seen. There's a famous story of Rebbe Yitzchak of Berditchev, who was a great Hasidic leader and was also a person who always found a way to defend the Jewish people, even in the most incredible circumstances. So one year on Yom Kippur, he gets up in the middle of shul and he bangs on the bima and he makes an announcement and he says, Ribono Shalola, Master of the universe, we have all sinned multiple times this year. And you can imagine just hearing those words from such a great man, people in the audience immediately became very emotional, and it was like a whole to-do in the shul. And then he pauses for a second and continues, but Hashem, it is your fault that we sinned. Now, if you think that the shul was in turmoil before, now everybody's shocked. This is the way you speak on Yom Kippur. How can you say such a thing? And Rebbe Levi Yitzchak continues as follows. He says, Hashem, if you would have taken the reality of Gan Eden and the world to come, and you would have put that in front of our eyes, and you would have taken the delicacies and temptations of this world and put them into a series of books that we would keep on the bookshelf, obviously we would all do everything that we were supposed to do, obviously. But instead, Hashem, what did you choose to do? You took all the delicacies and temptations of this world and you put them in front of our faces. And the reward and expectation of the world to come, you put in books on the shelf. So what do you want from us? Obviously we're going to sin. Because this is what we see and that's what we hear about. So in our world, the nigle, the revealed parts of the world, are the things that are relatable. So you open up a Gemara and it talks about an ox and you know what an ox is. And you look in the Gemara and it talks about two people who have an argument over where their properties begin and end. And we relate to that because it's happened to us as well. I've also had a fight with my neighbor. So it's relatable. It's stuff I can see. But then you start to talk to me about angels and spiritual worlds and esoteric Judaism. I don't see it. I've heard it. But when the Torah was originally given, which means that that's the pristine, original, perfect, beautiful Torah. How was it given? Royin esan nishma. That it was given in such a way that those spiritual concepts we only normally hear about, we could actually see. And that had such a profound effect on us that the things we normally see and take so seriously suddenly receded into the background. It's not such a big deal. So we won't have another kichel and herring. It's okay. Because right now we're getting divine revelation. So when the Torah was originally given, it was given as esoteric. The first experience of Judaism, the first experience of Torah that the Jewish nation ever had, was an experience of divine revelation. Yes, there were laws as well. Look at the Ten Commandments. It also contains laws, very pragmatic laws, and things that deal with the dregs of society in some elements. People who have to be told not to murder. But the starting point of the Torah experience was you start with the spiritual. You start with the revelation of Anoichi, my essence, and then you get to the laws. So actually the question's the other way round. why did that disappear into the background? Why is it that if Judaism was originally presented as this deep, spiritual, mystical thing, why did it then shift and become so much about the detail of law, and studying the mystical topics was reserved only for little groups, usually off the radar? That's the question that we should be asking. And when we examine that question properly, then we can answer the question about why it is that Chassidus is now a thing and it suddenly has come into the foreground, and why it is that for all those generations they did not do it. That's the key question. Not so much why now, but why not before. And that's, please God, what we'll continue to explore tomorrow.